All right, boys, the patch is out. We've read it. Now, what do we do with it? Like many of you, I've read it, I've consumed it, I look at things and go, oh shit, that's cool, but I don't really know how to take this into actionable changes in my gameplay. So what I did was ask my buddy Frisbee Dota, a 6.5k player, to take a look at the patch, kind of give us an overall view of the meta, and then how we, as you know, your average player, whether you're 2k, 3k, 4k, how we can take this information and put it to our advantage. You know, if we have an understanding of the game now, and other people don't, we'll have an advantage. Certainly people will catch up over time, but for me at least, this seems to give me a huge leg up for now, so hopefully you guys enjoy this as well.
I have been asked to share what I think, just initial thoughts on the patch notes, not even getting into heroes, just thoughts on potential gameplay changes in a way that could affect your everyday average player. So, what I first noticed was the changes to creeps. That is probably one of the more significant things to this metagame. In the previous meta, so 7.06, a lot of carry players I know were complaining at the beginning of that patch because they complained that it was essentially a mid laner oriented patch where the mid lane had an extra creep, they were getting more than the other lanes, and so the carry player was not able to get as much XP, potentially not as much gold, and you know, combining that with a tri-lane, the early mid-game was all mid-lane centric, and they felt kind of useless as you know, carry players. As that patch went later, myself as a mid player, it kind of became miserable as well because it became a definitely mid-centric game in that. So there were more creeps, you know, in the mid lane, and so you were like tri-laning mid lane versus tri-lane, and it was just awful. And so Valve's solution to that is what the changes in this patch. So, first off, there is no longer the extra creep in the mid lane, but creeps now give more XP and more gold. What this means, seemingly, is that the mid lane no longer gives more than the safe lane or the off lane. With that said, the deny changes also are extremely significant because now this is a patch that really rewards static laning. You want to get as much as possible in the early game. So mid lane seems like it's now becoming the true like skill lane again. You no longer are rewarded for giving your mid laner that extra push. But if you are tri-laning the off laner now, that XP deny change, where the reduction or the XP granted to the enemy is reduced from 70% to 25%, means that now if you're pushing them off or just denying every creep in the lane with your supports, it's a massive difference. You can just shut them out, and because kills give less experience now as well in the early levels, it can be very significant just to make sure that the enemy offlane cannot get up and running. Poor Man's Shield is gone, Iron Talon is gone, and so the offlane heroes don't have as many opportunities to come back into the game. The only redeeming grace of this seems to be the fact that they changed the map and moved where the shrine and the bounty rune spawned for the offlaners. So at the very least, if you're getting shut out, choked out, you can at least more safely get that bounty rune every 2 minutes. But you're not able to get as much from the lane if they're shutting you out, and you're not as able to get as much from the jungle. So this seems like it's going to be a very miserable patch for the offlane. But with that said, what it means is that you are going to want to protect the farm of your safe lane. You want to make sure they have the advantage in their lane and are able to pressure it as much as possible. Because of this, the hero pool in the off lane might change, you know. If off laners aren't able to get as much, you know, they're not really able to jungle as easily with no Iron Talon, and they're getting punished a lot harder just from the fact that there are heroes in their lane denying, you know, 75% of any of the XP they're even in range for. But offlaners that either can try to get something from the jungle, you know, maybe, you know, with the changes to Beastmaster or Enigma still, because he can deny, you know, the XP to the enemy team. But offlaners that can still get something out of the lane, or offlaners that work strong in a death ball, just with, you know, their ultimate. You know, if you think of Tidehunter, if you can draft, you know, Tidehunter in a lineup where all you need is to get his rabbit, and then you just group up every time it's up and try to push a building, with the superior team fight. Maybe that's all you need from your offlaner. Just think about what hero can have the highest impact, maybe with the lowest amount of early game farm. They can always get more later, but if you have an offlaner who's being completely shut out, you really do want to think about trying to make sure they can still have an impact on the game. If you think about it, there were the nerfs to the jungle creeps in previous patches, but now that the mid lane and the safe lane give the same amount, if you prioritize the farm and experience of your safe lane, of your carry, of getting as much as possible total XP for the lane, and getting as much as possible total gold for the lane by doing stuff like stacking and pulling, denying everything, you can both shut out the offlaner and maximize the amount of gold you can get for your cores on the map. Because in the mid lane, yes, you can go for kills, but getting the kills, the creep CS and the XP you get from those is much, much more important right now. Not to say that kills aren't important, but it seems that you will be rewarded much more just for making sure you get as much as possible out of this laning phase. So what does this look like in an actual game? Well, first off, there was the changes to neutral creeps, and now they spawn at a minute instead of 30 seconds, which means you cannot get that first stack, which means it's that much more important to win the lane. You have to make sure you zone the offlaner, control the creep aggro, and get denies. You do not want your creep wave pushing into the enemy tower, especially if you have 3 heroes in your safe lane. There's no excuse for letting that happen. So you can go for kills, but you want to make sure your creep equilibrium is at a good place so that you can start pulling and start maximizing your lane efficiency. Once you started getting a lead and getting your lane going, then you can start thinking about rotating. But you want to make sure that you give your carry player the best head start he can get, because of how much more efficient the lane creeps are compared to the jungle creeps. If you're a mid laner, you're going to want to start thinking about picking lane dominators. If lanes are static, if they're not rotating as much to your lane and focusing on the carry, and especially since the XP granted to an enemy on a deny has decreased from 70% to 25%, if you were able to win your lane and just out CS the enemy opponent by always, getting every last hit, or always keeping them on edge and pushing them off of farm, you choke them out. You can get 4 times, 5 times as much XP as they can, and prevent them from getting gold, because now they have even less opportunities, right? There's only 4 creeps instead of 5 in the mid lane. So every deny is more significant, because now the XP on every creep is closer, since melee creep XP got buffed and range creeps got nerfed. So you want to think about a lane dominator who can win the lane. It's going back, it seems, like to a skill lane, right? You want to be able to win it and leverage that advantage. If you, as the mid lane, are much stronger than the enemy mid lane, and your carry player has gotten the best head start, then you can turn that into a death ball. You can use that head start that your team has, that advantage, to group up and start taking objectives to further your lead. It's very similar in idea to the way a lot of Dota games are played, right? When you get a lead, you take objectives, and you press the lead to keep the other team on their toes and get further and further ahead, get more map control. But in metas which are more concentrated around the lane creeps and about how much each creep gives you compared to the jungle, it means it's that much more important. A good start can set you up to win the game just in the early game. Once it transitions out of the laning phase, you can get the ball rolling and start pushing towers. If you think about the new items like Meteor Hammer, for example, right? It's a bit weird. It's a 3-second channel, for damage and stun. 300 AoE, 1.75 second stun. It seems like it might not be that great, but if you can get one on your team, it's a 6-second debuff that deals 60 damage per second to structures or 115 to non-structures. So that's 360 damage to buildings, on a 40-second cooldown, or 690 damage to units on a 40-second cooldown. So if you're grouping up and you're able to get one of these, you can push buildings. It doesn't matter. If you have a stronger team fight than the enemy team and you're able to group up and push, if they're not able to fight into you, this is fine. They try to force a fight, you use Meteor Hammer and you're able to deal damage to them because you're not going to have as much pressure on your hero. If they're choosing to not defend or defend from far away, you now have an additional way to take buildings. It's only 2,600 gold. That's not that expensive. It's price, it's a little bit more than a 4-staff or something like that, but it's 360 damage to buildings every 40 seconds, or a potentially one team fight if you're able to get it off. So you want to think about winning your lanes really strongly, figuring out how to press that lead. Make sure you secure your carry, get stacks, get pools, shut down the enemy off lane. Make sure you get as much as possible for that lane before you start rotating. You do not want to leave your carry alone in a lane that they might be able to lose solo to the offlaner. If you're in the mid lane, you want to be a lane dominator. You want to make sure that you have the advantage in your lane. Make sure you are picking heroes that can get a significant advantage in the lane so that you can then leverage that as a team, group up, take objectives, and go for the win. Another little thing, just before I end this, that I noticed, the new Roshan on 3rd kill is insane. On Roshan's 3rd death, he drops a single-use consumable refresher orb with a cooldown that's independent from refresher orb. So this can win a game, simply off the back of having, another Echo Slam or another Ravage. You don't need the money for refresher orb. You can spend all your money on other items. If you can get this item, this can be a way of leveraging, that into a win. So just some things to think about the new patch. Not even going into heroes, but just as far as how the meta is going to shift, I think it's going to be a slower start, but it's going to pick up really fast because of the changes to the lane creeps and the addition of items such as Meteor Hammer.
All right, thanks a lot, Frisbee, for hopping on and giving us some of this insight. I wanted to kind of distill what we heard here into something actionable. So the way I understood it, mid lane no longer gives more XP or gold than safe lane or off lane, so you have to pick a mid laner that can win. I mean, that seems obvious, but sometimes you might pick a mid laner that excels later in the game. In this case, it seems pick a mid laner that can win his lane early. There's also heavy rewards now for static laning, which means you should be there sitting in the lane, focusing on last hits and denies, a whole lot less rotating, ganking, and roaming. It's also apparent that off-laning sucks big ones now. It's going to be tough to win, so even if you're not going to get last hits or XP, because the deny gives so much less XP, pick a hero that can still do well in team fights without farm or XP, for instance, Tidehunter. Another big thing in this patch so far is to prioritize farm for safe lane carries. The game kind of relies on them. You want to focus on stacking and pulling and make sure you deny everything. You need your safe lane to get super far ahead while making sure their off lane is shut down. Again, seems obvious, but again, this could mean a tri lane is much more effective than a roamer because you really want to focus on that safe lane. And again, as part of that, you do not want to auto attack. You don't want to push your lane equilibrium up under their tower. You want to make sure you're always back so you can get all the last hits, all the denies, and shut down their off laner. It also seems that the Meteor Hammer is really helpful for pushing and death ball strategies. From what Frisbee said, it's a fairly low-cost item for what you get out of it. And if you're going to be team fighting and pushing, this is kind of a no-brainer to have at least one on your team. And then the last thing I noticed he said was, that 3rd kill on Roshan is fucking huge, right? You get a refresher. Instead of spending 5,000 whatever on one, you get that Rosh drop, one extra Echo Slam, one extra Black Hole, one extra whatever, could absolutely win you the game. So, don't sit back and let Roshan just kind of die. It's now a huge deal. Get that 3rd Roshan kill. So again, thanks Frisbee for doing this for us. It's been very helpful for me and hopefully you guys as well.